Tell me when you're ready. Started? Well, hello. So, I'm Dr. James Ironman, and I do psychiatry, both inpatient and outpatient. And one of the things I'm really interested in is transpersonal psychiatry, or psychology, and that involves things like psychedelic therapies, breath work, meditation, yoga, trance dance, things like that. It turns out that that psychedelic therapies, in terms of psilocybin, have passed phase 3 at FDA, expedited treatment for depression. So we should be seeing it next year, although it's called psilocybin with psychotherapeutic support. It's not a drug. So it has to be done in a certain format. And I can explain some of that format as we go along. But I thought I'd talk about psychedelics as both therapy as both a big promise, because people with treatment-resistant depression respond to it, as well as people with drug problems, as well as with intensive therapy, as well as people with psychoses. Right? So, but there's a downside in that essentially what it does is it takes your ego functions offline, and it's a catalyst for your unconscious. So if your unconscious has problems, you're going to have big time problems. Okay? Because it's like magnifying. So, Groff calls psychedelics like the microscope for the psyche, or the telescope for the cosmic psyche, like that. So that's the issue. And so if we have problems in the unconscious, it's going to be greater. Right? If you can get through those problems, then it's pretty sweet. So we'll talk about it. Okay, so in current culture, essentially psychedelics came to prominence with Huxley, Aldous Huxley, who was an intellectual, wrote several things, several very popular books, one of which was Doors of Perception. And everybody thinks that's very cool after light poems, talking about doors of perception being cleansed, then you can see infinity everywhere, right? Well, that's sort of what we're talking about. However, the second text in that book was called Heaven and Hell. Not just heaven, but there's hell there too. Okay? So, and many people who have dealt with psychedelics have done so essentially in an irresponsible fashion. In other words, they did it for kicks, for fun, right? They didn't realize that they were dealing with psychological dynamite. Right? So, and irresponsible use will generally wind up with significant unhappy sequelae, right? So actually I did a workshop in psychedelics without drugs about a year ago now for the Jungian Analytical Psychology Club in San Francisco. And one of the women there afterwards said, I've lived with this problem since I was 16 when I had these bad trips on acid, and they resolved today. And she was not young, she was in her 60s. So she'd gone through 44 or more years of basically psychological hell due to unresolved acid trips. Right? Happens. Right? All right. Indigenous cultures have used psychoactive substances, but generally only in a sacred setting, or a controlled setting, a ritualized setting. They don't do it for fun. They don't go out and eat morning glory seeds, or eat peyote buds, or swallow mushrooms and have a good time and party. They do it in a ritualized setting and for some kind of healing, right? Whether it's healing of the body or healing of the soul. Right? So the oldest written version of this is the Rig Veda, and it was written 35,000 years ago. It's still in use in India today. The Rig Veda has 10 books in it, one of which is all about a psychedelic creeper called Soma, or Soma Pavamana. And indeed in Doors of Perception, Huxley goes back, he had previously talked about Soma as being a negative drug that was just sort of help you forget everything and be comfortable within consumer culture and this brave new world. He revised Soma as being that which actually gives you well-being, enlightenment, consciousness. So this was a juice of a creeper. Many people say they still don't know what it is. Some people think it's it was actually mushrooms, but it's very distinctly a creeper. In other words, it's a leafy plant. And I know some Ayurvedic docs that say no, where it's still being grown. So the Soma, there's a prayer to Soma in the Rig Veda, which says, keep me not in the phenomenal world of unreality. You can see where this is going quickly. Right? But make me go to the reality of the eternal self. Right? So open oneself up to that which has no boundaries and continues without end. Keep me not in the ignorant state of darkness, but lead me to the light of spiritual knowledge. So actually the experience of light is one of the experiences, or mystical light, illumination is one of the experiences that comes with psychedelics, and also with other approaches, meditation, chanting, dancing. Keep me not in the world of mortality, but make me go to the world of immortality. So what, when Buddha talks about nirvana, he's talking about blowing out all the relationships with the world that ends, the world of change. And whether that's change in this lifetime or multiple lifetimes, nirvana takes you to the world without end, or essentially consciousness without content, or pure consciousness, and you can't talk about it. There's nothing to talk about. But it has no beginning, has no end, as most of the things do in the unconscious. So when people talk about heavenly experiences, they're like eternal, because there's no sense of time. When people talk about hellish experiences, or crunchy experiences, they're also infinite without time, right? Because there's no boundaries with time in the unconscious. Time is a construct of the conscious mind, which we'll talk about as well, right? So this is actually the Soma Mandala, 9th mandala, right? So it's done, it has a particular deity, Madhu Chandas, which means honey mind, right? The god of honey mind. And the deity is Soma Pavamana, or the Soma juice, the Soma god, and it has a particular meter, which is common in Vedic things called the Gayatri. And the idea is they're offering the Soma, squeezing it, and it helps by using this liquid, this psychedelic drink. One can go beyond one's troubles, or rakshasas. The rakshasas were evil deities, right? That essentially are like harass you, whether they're internal or external, right? So, and then you experience the sense of affluence, right? In Indian literature, they talk about Lakshmi, right? But in say the Bible, or say in Heaven and Hell by Huxley, we'll talk about streets lined with jewels and gold and all that sort of stuff, right? So all kinds of riches are available inside the psyche. So, and they do talk about how it gets actually filtered through a woolen sieve when they do the actual sacrifice. Homa. Right, that's the Eastern version. Western version, we have back in ancient Greece a site called Eleusis, right? The Eleusinian mysteries. There are a number of mystery cults. This is just one. This one's been written up about a number of times. So it's easier to discuss. So the Cicero, who was a Latin, I was a Roman lawyer, a very famous Roman lawyer. If you're familiar with, Julius Caesar and any of those folks, Cicero actually died in those wars that happened after Caesar was murdered. And he was very articulate and wrote very wonderful defenses of a lot of Roman citizens. And in law school, many people still study Cicero for the logic of how to understand and also present legal cases. He is brilliant. Anyway, Cicero describes the Eleusinian mysteries as essentially bringing civilization to the ancient world. Right? It had been going on for 2,000 years until 392, when a Roman emperor who was a Christian fanatic had the place destroyed. But they would go in and they would have a drink. Plato, they almost met the same fate as Socrates because they thought the Platonic dialogues were revealing too much of the Eleusinian mysteries. Okay? So, in any case, it's believed that one experience of the Eleusinian mysteries was enough to dissuade people from the fact that they would die. They had a direct experience of the afterlife and of the dead, and they no longer believed this world was the only world. So they would visit the other worlds that most of the Greek mythology talks about, just with one experience. Actually, what they found at Eleusis was rye. Right? Ergot rye. And ergot rye is the source of LSD. However, ergot rye does not have LSD. It has lysergic acid monoethylamine, which has about 25% of the potency of LSD. However, LSD is extremely potent, and they drank goblets of this stuff. Right? So, and it was all ritualized, and they had. We really don't know all the details, except a few things like the fans they carried, and that there was drumming, and that they had a march from Athens and stuff. But the actual rites of Eleusis were never revealed. Right? Maybe we'll find some text someday if it does, but so far not. So in any case, it seems that the psychedelics had a major role in Roman Greco Empire. Ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is an Amazonian brew. You combine two plants, one of which has DMT and the other which has an MAO inhibitor, so you can get the DMT, because otherwise dimethyltryptamine would be deactivated in your gut by your monoamines, right? So, so the only way you can really get high on the rope of the dead of the ayahuasca plant is by combining with another plant that inactivates your stomach's MAO inhibitors. Now, how did they figure this out? If you read the texts, like The Wizard of the Upper Amazon by Bruce Lamb, who is a Harvard anthropologist, about Manuel Cordero Rios, which is the first Western rendition of ayahuasca, it's that the plant itself revealed it, right? Maybe they did some other psychedelic, or they were talking to plants because they were already pretty tripped out, I have no idea. But the plant taught them how to use it, right? And that's not unusual in the shamanic world. But they'll go around and talk to plants, and the plants talk back. Right? This is not your ordinary way of thinking in the West. So, anyway, Manuel Cordero Rios, I knew a woman in St. Louis. She was married to a psychiatrist. She was a flamenco dancer from Peru. And she was very famous. And she actually, when she was a child, she went and visited Manuel Cordero Rios. She was from Iquitos, where he was from. And she had a healing when she was like 6 years old from this guy. And he would use just not ayahuasca, they have special tobaccos and stuff like that they dust you with, and you inhale their smoke and stuff like that. But he was quite famous. Several Peruvian presidents went there. There are a number of cases, documented cases where people went with cancers and stuff like that, and he would heal them. There is a movie about him called The Wizard of the Upper Amazon, and it's from 1983. In the movie, they use a different psychedelic than ayahuasca, but it's the same story as Manuel Cordero Rios, with a little bit of a Hollywood ending, right? So, but it's where the kid gets kidnapped by the Indians who want to learn how to shoot rifles because they're being encroached on by other people because there's too much, deforestation going on, and so he lives with the Indians for several years till he's about 12 or 14, and then he escapes back to the Western world. But during that period of time, he's already been initiated to all the various plant substances, including ayahuasca. In any case, it's a very interesting movie. I recommend it to you if you have any interest in seeing what this stuff is about without having to take it. There's actually another movie which has even better psychedelic scenes, which is actually ayahuasca, even though they make it look like they're taking peyote, right? But the scenes are ayahuasca, and the shaman in the movie is actually an ayahuasquera. And so all the visuals are of ayahuasca, and it's called Blueberry or Renegade, and I think the French name is Blueberry and the English name is Renegade, and anyway, you can find that on Netflix too, I believe. Okay, so getting a little more contemporary, we have LSD studies. Albert Hoffman, sort of was synthesizing various ergotamines from rye, ergot, right? And his 25th formula from the rye ergot, which was generally used for things like, headaches or to stop bleeding after people gave birth, things like this. It was called LSD 25, and he didn't think it was very interesting when he first discovered it, but then something prompted him to go back and synthesize it again. And instead of he was discarding the whole experiment, and somebody said, go back and try that. And of course, what that something was, we don't know, but I have met Hoffman's wife, and I was at the 1-year anniversary of his death, and the story was that actually there was a light in the room that talked to him. The only time he ever had a hallucination, right, without drugs, was there was light in the room, a light, it was just in the air, and it told him, synthesize that drug again. And so he said, the story is that was the angel of LSD, okay? So anyway, LSD in 1943, he resynthesized it, and when he was, counting the material out, he got some dust on his fingers, and because he didn't know it was so potent, but it was extremely potent, and just a little bit through the fingers was enough to give him a very interesting bicycle ride home. In fact, it was so interesting, they called the medical doctor, because he thought he was dying. Right? I'll talk about that in a moment. He literally thought he was dying, and so his wife calls the doctor, the doctor comes over and says, you're fine. Right? And then afterwards he goes out in the garden, and he's having this wonderful, blissful experience, and he figures out, this is some type of psychoactive substance. And psychopharmacology began on that day. Right? So before that, people really didn't think you could influence the mind with drugs. But after that time, people started looking for stuff. So this was actually the first time that drugs were known to have some type of effect where you could activate, psychological states. Not that, alcohol and whatever, opium didn't cause things, but it wasn't the same thing. It wasn't something you could explore. So, all right. So Stan Groff was a. Did I talk about that? I should go back. So, okay. So Stan Groff was a medical student in the early 50s, and in Czechoslovakia. And Sandoz, who Hoffman worked for, sent out free LSD called Delsid, little vials of LSD, and where they had no idea what it was good for, but they thought that it should be used in psychiatric research because it brought up all kinds of things, right? The psychoanalysts were interested, right? Alcohol treatment programs were interested. There were 1,000 studies of LSD and alcoholism before 1960, all basically positive. A few were null studies, but none were negative. So it actually had a very good reputation before 1960 in the scientific world. In any case, Grof was a student, and he thought this was interesting. He was interested in Freud. He'd read some Freudian stuff, and he was captured by the psychiatric mindset. And as a student, he helped out with some of the studies, and when he got to be a resident, then he could be a participant. So he decided as soon as he got to be a resident, he went down and asked his supervisor if he could be a subject. The supervisor said, sure. But his supervisor was, at that time, neurologists and psychiatrists were pretty closely on the same training, right? So neurologists were psychiatrists and psychiatrists were neurologists. We still have the same boards. So anyway, his teacher was interested in stroboscope. So he wanted to drive the brain waves. So he hooked him up to an EEG and drove the brain waves, and Grof felt himself expand and expand and expand. He left the world. He was going through the galaxies. He left the universe, and he was into some Tibetan realm. I don't know what he described it, but like that. On his first trip, right? So it got his attention, big time. And that became his major work. So he actually became a psychoanalyst in Czechoslovakia. And he was a Freudian analyst, and he was basically an atheist. I mean, he wasn't a spiritual kind of guy. He did have this experience. He only labeled it later. But he had this fascinating experience. He thought this was just very interesting brain chemistry, right? An interesting experience. So he's doing psychoanalysis with all these folks in Czechoslovakia from like 56 or 7, whenever he became a psychoanalyst, until like 65, when he was invited to the United States to give a talk at Johns Hopkins by a guy named Walter Pankey, who was doing studies with LSD and the Good Friday experiment and all this sort of stuff. And Maslow and all these folks wanted him to come. So he comes and he gives a talk, and he gets invited to take a position, and he goes back to Czechoslovakia, and he's going to move, and they put him in jail, so they don't want him to emigrate. He's in jail for about a year, and suddenly the doors open, and somebody hands him 2 airplane tickets and says, you have 3 hours to get out of town. So who did that? I have no idea, but the CIA did have some project going on. MLK, something or other, 109 or something project. And and they were very interested in using like psychedelics against the Russians and things. It could be weaponized. So in any case, he gets to the States. He takes a job at Johns Hopkins, and he continues with his psychoanalytic treatment. But about that time, Timothy Leary and crowd were making a lot of waves, and the government, became in 1967 it became illegal to have LSD. Right, it was put on the schedule. And then they started cutting back how much experiments you could do. So he had to go from this open-ended psychoanalytic model, which generally was like 30 to 60 sessions of LSD and psychoanalysis, right, with several sessions of follow-up after each one, to 3 sessions. You can only do 3 sessions. And in which case there was a woman named Helen Bonney who did guided imagery with music at Johns Hopkins. I don't know if anybody's done that. Maybe the older therapists have. So it's a standard, guided imagery thing with music. And she said, well, let's put the music to this. So they put music with the LSD, and so they had this music therapy with psychedelics. And in 3 sessions, he felt people went through the same types of changes. They go through 30 or 60 sessions of psychoanalysis. I had his papers. I got his papers in 1970, which are mostly the psychoanalytic. And I was a research, I was doing some research at Mass General on the Stanley Cobb research floor. And I was doing artificial intelligence, stochastic speech generators, mimicking various psychiatric disorders type of speech. Right? That project was under ARPA, then DARPA, and it turned into Siri at Stanford Research Institute in 2005. But we just interviewed people in the ER who were having troubles, right? And came in with different diagnoses. In any case, I'm sitting there doing this artificial intelligence stuff in psychiatry, and the guy next to me is doing cat brain, split brain stuff, right? And his article wound up in Scientific American. Mine just barely made it through my review at medical school, right? So, because they thought it was just too weird, right? But cat brains are more readily accepted. But anyway, he drops Groff's papers on me. He said, "Oh, you'd be interested in this." I said, "I didn't know why I'd be interested in this, but I read them and I was." So, and the LSD psychoanalytic studies, they go through Freudian phases, so personal biography, and then they go through a death rebirth thing, where they totally fall apart. And indeed, if you're a neurotic, you have to be hospitalized. If you're normal, you get pretty neurotic. If you're psychotic, you go back to the back ward, because you get really wild, right? And then they'd have a death rebirth experience. So it was Freud and then something called auto-rank, or birth trauma. And then it came up, got it together in a Jungian framework, which Groff says in those early papers he resisted because it was all this archetypal mythological stuff, right? Or the collective unconscious, right? Like Greek myths, like Vedic myths, all that sort of stuff, right? From anything from anywhere. Didn't matter what your background was. So in any case, he had about total, before he had to retire to Essen, he had about 4,500 case studies. When he came to the United States, he had about 3,500 in his suitcases, right? And out of that data, he came up, as a psychoanalyst, psychoanalysts like to go back to earlier experiences, being the root cause for later experiences, right? So, you had trouble with your brother or sister, or you're envious of boys because they had penises, or you had a bad breast experience, whatever, that type of stuff. Well, with that same mindset, he came up with intrauterine trouble. Right? Let's not stop at birth. Let's go earlier. Right? And so he came up with 4 perinatal birth matrices, which are the obstetrical 4 perinatal birth matrices. Right? So you have intrauterine experience. Right? You have labor. You have passage through the birth canal, and you have birth itself. And he would rephrase these on the transpersonal or mythological level as intrauterine heaven, right? Which is what Freud said. Freud thought that spiritual experiences were regression to the womb. Right? When he was confronted by Roman Roland, who was a French intellectual, about a guy named Ramakrishna, Freud got very upset about all this and had to figure it out. That's where the book Future of Illusion came from. And he actually states, these sound like regression to the womb. Well, it might be true, right? It's very heavenly, oceanic, everything's fine. Unless, of course, it's disturbed. We'll talk about that too. And then you have just the opposite. I call these emotional seasons. Summertime, cotton's high, mama's good looking, fish are jumping, all that sort of stuff. And then you have, autumn, everything dies, it falls apart, things turn cold, right? So 300 pound, mama, by the way, the uterus is the strongest muscle in the body, sorry guys, puts about 300 pounds per square inch out. Right? So it's a real vice, right? And we've all been through it unless you were a C-section, and then you had probably a few of these, but not much. So 300 pounds per square inch until you're born, right? So it's basically hell, no exit, Sartre called it, right? And it's like not much fun. I mean, you know, the blood's getting cut off, or getting squeezed, meconium's coming out, you know, all this. It's not a very pleasant experience. And then the cervix opens, and the baby starts to